Welcome back to the Atlanta Construction Podcast. Very excited for our podcast today. This is an Against the Clock featured podcast in association with Construction Clock, the first hands-free time tracking app dedicated to the construction industry. We're pleased to welcome Marco Gallo, founder of EightTwelve Building Solutions, and we're going to be discussing today just a really exciting, unique, and interesting project and construction contract with Raw Almond for pop-up restaurants in some crazy locations. But firstly, Marco, thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me, and yeah, excited to talk about the wild and weird world of pop-up restaurants.
Yeah, for sure. So to get started, just give us kind of the down low on Raw Almond as a client and sort of when you started to build these pop-up restaurants before we get into some of the interesting details.
So it's a local architect that started a art gallery in downtown Winnipeg, teamed up with a restaurateur that owned a restaurant in Winnipeg to do these pop-up restaurants on the ice every single year at the Forks in downtown Winnipeg. So it's where our two rivers meet. They would do a pop-up restaurant for 20 days. It became a design competition for the stylization of the building itself. And then they fly in chefs from around the world for high-end dining, 5-course meals, and we have to somehow keep them warm and keep a kitchen operational on ice in the middle of winter.
Wow. Can you, for our listeners, before we go any further, just define a pop-up restaurant, assuming it's it's temporary?
So it's a temporary structure. We still have to abide by all health and safety standards for exiting, health and safety for food prep, all those things, lighting, egress. It's completely on the frozen river in Winnipeg. And yeah, I guess that kind of covers it. The pop-up aspect, it is completely temporary. It goes up and then it comes back down. Otherwise it would melt and disappear in the spring.
Right. So typically how long are they left up just for the winter season, I'm assuming, or kind of a month or so in between in the safest time with the temperatures, certain degree? And
yeah, it's usually about 30 days total. Gives us about a week and a half for build. And then there's, 20 to 25 days of seatings. And then it comes back down again. It usually starts first week of January for the build because at that point, the ice is safe. We've got about 2 to 2.5 feet of ice at that time of year. So we can drive trucks and trailers and lifts and all kinds of things to get our materials and equipment down there.
So how many of these pop-up restaurants have you built for Raw Almond thus far?
We've done 7 in Winnipeg. We've done 1 in Gimli, which is a little lake town, about an hour drive north of Winnipeg. And then we did the one in Churchill, Manitoba, which is a flight away, and it's on the bay in northern Manitoba.
So anyone who's going to these restaurants to dine, they'd be taking like a Cessna, some kind of a plane out to the location.
Churchill does have it's not an international airport, but it is a puddle jumper airport to go farther north to Baffin Island. Right. But yeah, they're decent sized commercial flights, 80 seater kind of planes. But that's the only way in and out of Churchill. You used to be able to go by rail, but since some mudslides and things, it's become increasingly difficult to get to Churchill by rail.
Wow. So for anyone listening now at this point, builders that are listening, they're probably thinking like logistic wise, materials, labor, the challenges, so many challenges that one would assume. Tell us a little bit about, obviously, I'm assuming the materials shipped out in a sea can, but tell us some stories of maybe, a milestone, one of these 7, just of some challenges you've had to overcome with such drastic conditions.
Wind is horrible, as everyone in the construction industry knows. It's one thing to have your mind and your body fail, but tools just tend to stop working at minus 25, minus 30, especially air powered tools. We start to get condensation and they just fault out on you. Battery life expectancy is horrible. In the Winnipeg aspect, we are a major city. We've got hardware stores and Home Depots and all those good things. But when we start to go more remote, it's not just, oh, someone go jump in the truck and go pick up a box of number 8 Robbies and come back again. It's a little more complicated than that. So in Churchill specifically, it's sort of like gambling, going to the hardware store. You don't really know what you're going to get, and you have to be comfortable adapting to a situation and hot rodding these things together in certain cases.
So how does that work with the hard spec and plans, or are you able to be creative on the design? Is that you have full control then? Is that what?
There's certainly some fluidity to how it goes together. The Churchill build was prefabricated to avoid as many of these issues as possible. So everything got shipped to us and was pre-measured and all those good things, and then a lot of redundancies of, let's ship 3 of those, we only need 1. Let's ship 5 of those, we only need 2, in the event that something breaks in transit or doesn't fit, or we have to adapt in the situation.
So what about safety wise, like as far as safety standards? You're thinking the typical toolbox talks, but is there visits from safety third party often or more frequent because of the nature of the project?
It's surprisingly less frequent because it's sort of borderlining on a sculptural installation as well as an occupiable space at the same time.
Because of its classification then, okay. Yeah.
And then especially in Churchill, the safety, it's a cowboy town for sure. So it's safety standards aren't the same that they'd be in a major city. We did have the issue of polar bears in Churchill. That was one thing I've never had to worry about on a job site. So that was experience I'll never forget. We had a bear guard associated with us that was just hired to walk around the fort all day with a shotgun and make sure that we weren't going to get eaten while trying to be carpenters.
I think people think of polar bears like the Coca-Cola commercials, but they're actually like absolutely vicious beasts.
They're big and they're scary, and they're pretty hungry that time of year. There's where we were about a half a mile out, you could see the sea ice where it doesn't freeze anymore, where the water coming out of Churchill, the fresh water is mixing with the salt water, so it's all open water there, and the polar bears just hang out there all day fishing and hunting. And then they come into town at night to try to find whatever else they can, people included. And yeah, it was wild to have to do. They were called bear sweeps. We do a job site bear sweep every single morning, and our bear guard would radio us in that it was okay to come to site.
Wow. That's insane. That's not your typical challenge to deal with on a construction project for sure. So tell us a little bit about, for these pop-up restaurants and having the design, at least somewhat or maybe mostly internally, and having control of that. Like what materials are you using for the structure? Is there different materials used for glazing, for windows? Just anything, interesting about the assemblies on the envelope or roof. Just maybe kind of tell us a little bit about some of the ways the materials maybe are different.
So with the Winnipeg ones, there is recycling in mind, because this can be pretty wasteful to build something temporary and then just putting it in a dumpster and sending it to a landfill when it's all done. So that's typically a design intent and almost a restraint of, can this be recycled? Can it be taken down and reused or repurposed? So there's a lot of those conversations that happen early on. A lot of pipe and clamp scaffolding. The kitchen gets reused every single year in Winnipeg. So it's the same 40 by 20 kitchen that we have all prefabricated spray foam panels that tip up and then the kitchen layout goes inside, and everything's wipeable and food safe. So that's great as far as the waste component goes. For windbreaks and insulation, tarping also creates really unique lighting situations to let diffuse light through. So it makes these really beautiful interior sort of vignettes that are sort of unexpected happy accidents. As far as the Churchill build went, it was modeled after I believe it was supposed to be the inner hull of a ship. So it was all done out of 3-ply LVLs built as A-frames, and then it wasn't the same A-frame across the whole thing. It would undulate. So it sort of came out of the landscape and then dove back into it, and you'd enter in one side and then exit out the other. And the Northern Lights in Churchill are world renowned. People fly in from around the world to experience them, along with the polar bears. So that was a massive component to this design that Amin had put together. So in the dining room itself of this restaurant, we clad the whole A-frame in a crystal clear, incredibly thick poly, and you dim the lights down, and you would be, having your beautiful 5-course meal underneath the Northern Lights. So that was a really unique experience to try to do a weatherproof, safe environment that was also completely clear in the middle of nowhere.
Must be satisfying though, as an architect yourself, to work on such a unique project. Like, I'm sure there must have been a level of satisfaction with those, especially maybe the Churchill one, that you just don't get from your typical, fit up or home build or whatnot.
It's very satisfying, and it's quite, it's almost, I'm a big camper. It's sort of glamping, for lack of a better term. So it's quite nice to know that it doesn't have to be completely perfect, because it is temporary, and it's more about, globally how it functions, rather than, that baseboard didn't get silicone on the top of it. We're not having those types of conversations that we would typically have when we're walking a commercial site or doing a punch list. So there's something really nice about its temporary nature.
Can you tell us a little bit about, the nature of these pop-up restaurants? Like, as far as the disassembly, is there reuse? What happens after the season? Is it taken apart, categorized, and then it's all set for the following winter season? Just
Churchill one they haven't done it in a few years because of COVID, but that one would get recycled each year. There's certain sacrificial components, like, some sheeting won't go back together the exact same way it did last time. So some of the sheeting just ends up having to get thrown away. But the bones themselves definitely get reused every year if they do continue it. The ones in Winnipeg, the design is different every year. So a lot of times the bones of that are usually pipe and clamp scaffolding, so that those can just go back to a job site and be used, for stucco or low-rise buildings or what have you throughout the year, and then we can reuse them for a quick little restaurant.
So this is an ongoing project then, with the reassembly and each winter season for this client. Tell us how this came about. Is this was it tendered? How would you price something? How did you price the first one, or how did that relationship work with your team and the client?
I think maybe we were the only ones stupid enough to agree to do it.
Well, I don't know. I'd say replace stupid with courageous and risk taking, and well, maybe a little bit.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, having a design background, these types of things are they're enticing to our company, and they're fun, they're temporary, they're good for the city. We may or may not get some free tickets out of it from time to time, so that also.
Yeah, great spot for a date for the girlfriend of the wife, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it justifies me coming home completely windburnt and exhausted. So
Or gone for a month. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I wonder if, just in context, maybe tell us a little bit about, 812 Building Solutions. Maybe just a little bit about your background, and obviously, aside from the feature of this Against the Clock featured podcast with these pop up restaurant builds, this such unique projects. Just for context, a little about 812 Building Solutions and the company itself, and the other services that you provide, be it residential, commercial, whatnot.
So we are a general and residential and commercial general contractor in Winnipeg. We primarily do new builds, major renovations and additions on the residential side. And on the commercial side, we do tenant improvements, low-rise buildings, multifamilies, anything kind of wicked and weird. We also somehow end up getting roped into. I think it's because of design background that when an architect has a really great idea but has no idea how it's going to stand or align or any of those buzzwords that architects bury in their drawings all the time, we get the call for those as well, or at least we like to get the call.
So, and I think this will tie in, to our featured episode on these unique projects. As I think you mentioned, yourself and your partner Marco are both from a design background. So, being architects, having a design background, when you're taking on these projects, from a business standpoint, can you speak on like the sort of risk analysis, or sacrificing maybe margin or risk level for the satisfaction of unique projects? Obviously that's part of your mentality in taking on these pop-up restaurants. Can you just speak a little bit on sort of how you and your business partner, your management team, kind of assess the risk? Obviously it's a business, you need to make margin, and then what you're willing to sacrifice on the left to right brain thinking of, like, you want to be involved in these unique projects in the design side, but it's got to make sense numbers wise. Can you speak on that a little bit? It's a little long winded, but.
So that's a great point. To answer it shortly, these are the projects that don't make money. Let's be honest. They are, good for PR, good for the city. They tie in our design background and sort of stimulate that part of the brain. And they end up getting us referrals, which is great. So, it's sculptural, but it's also marketing at the same time, but it's also sort of campy, the whole thing. So the projects that keep the lights on are the new builds and the commercial tenant improvements and things like that. There's not much risk involved for us because we usually donate some time, and it's usually done at a discounted rate. But we usually just do it on a cost plus scenario, so everything's open book, and these things tend to evolve and have to adapt quickly. So quoting them would be an absolute nightmare, and there would have to be so many.
You really can't. You can't hard quote a project like that, right? So, and I guess, again, to your point, you've got a lot of revenue happening with your typical commercial residential, and then you're able to take these on as special projects, with knowing that that these aren't for margin on the grand scheme of things. These are kind of on the side, and they serve a purpose in that regard.
They're romantic, which is a part of being the owner of a construction business. Is there is some romance to the whole thing, and that's why I got into it in the first place, is that pursuit.
Amazing. Yeah, I think people are romantic about sports, they're romantic about building too, and that's it's kind of what eventually keeps us going. Is there anything else you want to mention? I think we've touched on a lot of this, of some of 812 Building Solutions story, your story, and just this theme of these pop-up restaurants. Anything we didn't touch on, maybe that you feel our listeners should hear, or to close out?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could talk a bit about the weather there because I know that that is we're used to it, unfortunately. But I know that it's can be shocking to hear some of the temperatures and the conditions from other people. So I can probably talk a bit about that.
Absolutely.
It's minus 62 when we got off the plane with the wind chill, and I think we landed at about 7:30 in the morning, and we are supposed to be on site at 9:30. Um, it was a 1 hour tundra buggy ride, so this is basically a school bus on top of a monster truck, and that's used as our site trailer, quote unquote. There's a couple propane fireplaces in there to heat the space, so we use that for keeping batteries warm, keeping ourselves warm, warming up tools when they would go into cold delay, uh, being safe from bears as well. So that we had a 1 hour commute on the tundra buggy across the bay ice just from the port of Churchill even to get to our job site for the day. So that was again a unique experience. And you're sort of looking out this buggy at this windswept, incredibly harsh landscape and thinking in that moment, what have I done? Why am I here? What are we doing? But you know,
You must have had some serious doubt set in that moment. Like, what are we doing?
it was yeah, it was a bit eye opening. We were just driving to,
Yeah.
you look out the front windshield and it just was to nowhere. We're like, where are we going?
Yeah, it's part of the adventure, though.
Yeah, so that was definitely a very unique experience and temperatures. I've built in the low minus 50s with wind chill, but nothing like that. And then it being wet cold up there, which we don't really get a lot of in Manitoba. We're dry, so minus 40 doesn't feel nearly as bad as a minus 20 in Halifax or Vancouver.
Absolutely.
But we have sea ice that touches Manitoba, so being wet cold in Manitoba at that temperature was absurd. You cannot dress for that no matter what you wear. So there's a lot of eye-opening moments and more warm-ups than we're used to in the tundra buggy.
You mentioned, I think, maybe prior to going on air, something about uh, past settlements. I think it might have been in the early 1800s or something. It's a little bit of history there on one of the locations. Was that the Churchill port, where they had the Hudson Bay connection on that project?
Yeah, so most of the goods for western from Winnipeg west, before the advent of the railroad, things would get shipped into the port of Churchill, and then they would get on a boat and sail south to Winnipeg, and then they would get on another boat and keep heading west on other rivers. So most of the British shipments would come through. Churchill was a major port, so it was also a really strategic port when the French and the British were fighting over who was going to run Canada, basically. So the restaurant that we built was inside of Fort Churchill, which was strategically placed at the end of a peninsula and would guard the port and shoot down the French if they were showing up. And sometimes the French would be running it, and other times the British would be running it. So it changed hands a few times.
Oh, such an interesting detail on that project. That's like, I think too, the Hudson's Bay Company is, I think it's the oldest company.
It's the oldest
Registered
acting
business.
corporation
Corporation.
on the planet. Yeah, it's 16 something. It's over 400 years old.
Yeah, insane. Those were different times, the trading days and those things. Yeah.
Yeah, money didn't matter. It was goods.
Barter economy. Yeah, for sure. Um, Man, those are some great details. Anything else, Marco?
I mean, I could talk about the bar life in Churchill, but I don't know if that's going to go in the air or not.
Oh, is there pop-up bars there as well?
The one bar in town was everyone was there. It was bingo night, and definitely a little worrying seeing your bear guard at the bar.
He's off duty.
Don't have too
Yeah.
many. Don't have too many there. We
Oh
need you in the
man.
morning, buddy.
Yeah. That's great, man. It's just a great. It's been a great chatting with you on this. Kind of blown away with you hear about so many of these projects that go on, right? You don't always know about them or hear about them, but it's nice to get to dig in with you on these and hear about such a unique build, such unique builds. It's crazy.
I can't imagine building a school or a gym or a rec center. A lot of companies do that up north, and I can only imagine the challenges that they would face. Like ours was easy by those standards. We were 4 days to build it and 2 days to take it down. So it was quick and dirty compared to months on an island. You can only probably get materials to by ice road and
Yeah.
flying in and out and all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I mean, and those would be, much larger corporations and logistics and systems in place for such drastic, organization for those things. But still, for your company to take these on, it's impressive, and congrats on that. And yeah, it's been great to talk to you today. And I know our listeners in the East Coast and Central Canada and we have some Western Canada too will enjoy tuning into this episode. It's definitely one of the most unique story wise episodes we've had on. We're pushing toward 60 some odd episodes now, so thank you for being a special one. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me, and congrats on all the success of the podcast.
Cheers, Marco. Thank you.